Hey, this is Red Hawk. I'm here with Mary Ann Rudis and Bob Hayes, and we're hanging at the deep end. And you know, we've had an unbelievable journey. We've taken you from before the beginning, actually way before the beginning. We've tried to project certain understandings and new ways of seeing as science is trying to catch up with nature, if you will. And from being to life to consciousness, consciousness is a tricky puppy. It really is. It's a house of mirrors, and there's all these mechanisms that we come up with that are just amazing. You know, Freud came up with defense mechanisms. And although if you study the field of psychology, you can get up to 20 and 30 of these, they get real fine. But the main 7, denial, displacement, projection, rationalization, reaction formation, repression, and sublimation. Woo-hoo. Projection. Projection's a big one, especially right now, because I think we live in a sea of projections, our own and others. And it's easy to get lost in these projections and to mistake them for what is real. And I think that that's part of the good thing about projection is we can learn to see it. Now, what is it? Projection is defined, and I'm going from psychology today, as unconscious discomfort that can lead to attribute unacceptable feelings or impulses. You put them on someone else to avoid confronting them or feeling that discomfort yourself. Projection allows the difficult trait to be addressed without the individual fully recognizing it in themselves. And there's a lot of sides to projection. You know, there's the dad who is feeling totally unsuccessful in his life, and he keeps telling his kid, "You'll never amount to anything." It's important for us to sort through these to get a sense of them. And today, there's another side of projection, not just projecting the negative aspects, but projecting the good aspects on others. For instance, we have a self-described pussy-grabbing, vicious, hurtful, and vindictive man, Donald Trump, and people who are very good people that I know are good people are projecting their goodness on him. They don't see those things because they can't see through their own goodness they're projecting on them and the goodness of the tradition that their party has been. It's just another way of protecting oneself from the views of others and from our own discomfort. Now, this projection, I'm focusing on it because right now I think we are in a sea of projection, as I said. And if you just listen to the news, they're even starting to use the language of projection to understand the other side. And I'll be honest, if you go to Fox News, you will see a barrage of projection in every single direction. The GOP now is against everything and for nothing because they're full of their own projection of the discomforts of the incongruity of their own being. Now, that's a political statement, but it's a psychological one, and it's part of what I think is a projection that has reached the level of group hysteria. And so I want us to get a sense that we can do something about this. But I also want you to know that people who project the most are those who are least aware, have self-awareness. They're not as self-critical. And so if you become more self-critical and the projections start to no longer protect you and you start to feel discomfort, well, I celebrate and have a drink in your name because I know discomfort is painful. However, I also know that projections keep us from waking up to reality within ourselves and without ourselves. So today, I'm going to go to projection. And Bob, I'll start with you first. I think you had some loaded stuff on the other side of the coin.
Well, this projection is one of the most interesting topics I've topics I ever found in my study of psychology. Like a lot of these different defense mechanisms, so-called, Freud was right in what he said about them, but he was very narrow in his interpretation. Projection, as you very rightly stated, Red Hawk, is not just projecting our ill feelings on someone else, but it's really a fundamental part of the way our perception works. And I could go into details about how sensation gets converted into perception and how our different nervous system aspects are interpreted by our brain, things like that. But what I want to make very clear is that everything we see in the world is a projection. There is nothing out there that is not a projection of what's going on inside us. Now, sometimes those projections can be reinforced by certain facts that we're able to establish and so on, but even those are going to be colored by our own internal self-image and the way we project that out onto the blank canvas of the universe. We're not just projecting our ill feelings, but we're projecting our hopes, our dreams, our fears, and it's one of the most, I'm sure that you encountered it in your pastoral work where you were having to deal with couples that were having problems. And one of the big problems in couples is that the man projects his dreams of what a woman is onto the woman, and the woman is projecting her dreams of what a man is onto the man. So that neither one of them are really seeing who they're dealing with. They're dealing with their own internal representations. Now, as we're moving in the direction of self-discovery, that knowledge becomes a very powerful tool. And I think that's what we're going to be getting into as we continue our discussion today. Because once you realize you're projecting, then you have the means to alter those projections and the means to be more forgiving of other people's that are projecting onto you.
Yeah, and I think you gave it the broader context in which to see the defense mechanism aspect that we are our own defense mechanism. It is, we talk about semi-permeability. Well, what you just talked about is one of the grids of semi-permeability, the filters of what we let in and how we let it in. And we'll continue that. Marianne, what are your opening comments on this? We just threw a whole lot at you, sweetie.
And I am not a psychologist, psychiatrist, nor am I a pastor. But I am a human being in this world trying to figure out what the heck is going on, right? And how to best navigate my way through it. And I think when I think of projections, our experience, and I used to always think of this, my past experiences and the influences that I've had in my life are going to deeply affect the way I see the world. And so I think for us to be able, so that's projection, right? Because I have an understanding of what life is, what life has been, and what life should be by what I've been taught and what I've been seeing. And I think for us to be able to get beyond that projection, we have to rise above our own personal experiences. We have to allow an opening to say, okay, this is the way I feel, this is the way I see, but this is not necessarily the way it is. And so opening that, creating that opening and being able to understand things from a place that you haven't experienced. And I think that's where our need for community comes in. Because even when we project onto someone else, we are projecting ourselves onto them. And when we meet another person and we have an experience of them, we're getting back information about ourselves. And at what point do we be able to transcend that, to jump that, and say, okay, I'm getting back some new information that is outside of my own consciousness, my own experience. Well, consciousness is one, so outside of my own experiences, right? And allowing that opening. But I think you said it, Bob. Everything is a projection, and how do we live in a world aware of that? And I think that's that other piece is making ourselves aware of it, or stopping ourselves, and that's where contemplation and meditation and all of those prayer, all of those modalities come in to allow us to be able to step outside of the matrix or all of this everyday stuff, and create an opening to be able to see something that we may not have known before. And I guess that's grace, and we talked about that at one point too.
And I mean, what we're talking about here, and I'm glad it came back to this, is the real. This is the human search for the real. And what we know, and I mean know, is that the real is mysterious. It's not something that can be defined and put in one's pocket. It's something bigger than that. And I love, Bob, what you said, we're all coloring the world with our own projections. For me, I was always happy, but something was driving me crazy. And after a year of therapy, I found my sad room. And I've shared this before. I realized that in my family of origin, I was the one that could never be sad. I had to be the happy one, the jokester and all those things. When I found my sad room, people were saying, Red Hawk, are you okay? You depressed? I went, no, I'm just sad, man. I've never been sad before. You see, I had been projecting something out there that I was not owning myself. And when I owned it, boy, was it uncomfortable. And as a pastor, the bastion of all wisdom, it's amazing the stuff that gets projected on the minister dude or the minister woman. And half my ministry was breaking that projection. Seriously, it was like, no, we're in this together. I'm the facilitator of trying to talk about this journey of which Marianne, this is where you came into the picture, because I don't want to lead anybody anywhere. I want to explore and find new, like you said, Marianne, new experiences, new ways of seeing things. And I'm not going to always get that from myself. That's why, as you said, community is so important. And so this whole conversation about projection is really about our coming out from under our own projections into a more honest reality, the real. And the real keeps, as you for me, getting older, being honest with the whole age thing, going under every kind of knife I can imagine, and being educated as I do that, it becomes more real. The word psychedelic means mind manifesting. We are taking our grandson, because, he got potty trained, wanted to know where the poop comes from, and now he wants to know where the poop goes. So we're taking him to the wastewater plant. We got a book, and it explains it. We're going to have the people who run the plant sign his book. But just following that thread, and there's a thread in every direction on everything you look at, and we are projecting on those, and we're trying to find the real. And that's what science is about. That's what psychology is about. Bob, you laid out some great, from sensation to perception. I think that's that trail, that long and winding road of the way something comes in from my eye and goes through all these filters and gets interpreted as me, in the great array of what the fucks. Now I have to hit the button that I used. Bad language, but I'm serious. This projection is huge, and if we can sort through it, and it is a soul-searching thing, and I think, Marianne, that's what you really implied, that it's to get inside oneself and to experience the discomfort that you've been projecting on others. That's a very difficult task, I think.
Well, and I think you said something about finding the real. Yes. And go ahead, Bob. I didn't mean to jump in.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I think that journey of self-discovery that I know the three of us are on, and I think probably most of our listeners are on their own journeys of self-discovery, or they wouldn't be listening to us. Once you become aware of the fact that projection exists, not that we're going to be able to stop projecting, because we can't, that's part of our being. But once we realize that we are projecting, then we can bring some other tools to the table, tools like empathy, where we can say, well, wait a minute, I'm projecting onto this person or this organization or this event, and I need to stop for a minute and slow down and think a little bit about what part of me is part of my perception of that, and what part of the external world. And it's that interaction that is really what we are looking for when we say we're looking for the real, because the other person's projection is just as real as ours, and to them is just as important as ours. So once we start realizing that, we start realizing that everybody's projecting on everybody else all the time, then we can slow down and say, wait a minute, let's see where we've got some commonalities. Let's see where my perception of this event is going wrong, and how can I learn from the other person. And that's where empathy comes in.
And that is... Go ahead, Mary Ann.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it just creates a relief, a contrast between the projection and me. And what we want to grow is the me, not the projection. So the closer we get to who me is, the closer we get to what I would call an authentic growth cycle.
That is, so both of those comments are so... They hit home for me really, really heavy, and the way you both just expressed that, it gives language to something that I see playing out all the time, and I love that you use the word empathy, because not just empathy for others, but empathy for ourselves. And so when we get to that place of looking at situations, and I'm thinking of like a conflict situation, not necessarily something that's going right, because a lot of times conflict is when we start to question. Conflict is where we start to question ourselves and we start to question others. And we can get to a place where we're constantly questioning ourselves and bending to the will of the other's projections and the system and the world out there, and then we're tossed about. So what you said, Red Hawk, about really getting to know who we are and ourselves is key, and it goes back to the know thyself, right? And once we can get to that place where, okay, I know that I have the ability and the unconscious mechanism that I can project out into the world, and so I'm aware of that, and I'm going to be looking for that. But there's another side of that to where, okay, it's not me, it's the outside world projecting something, and finding that place to hold your ground, I think, is also very key. And I think at least I would get lost in that. For many years, I got lost in that because I always knew that my perception could be flawed. And finally coming to a place where, oh no, it's not me, it's them, right? Or and holding your ground in those places. So.
And you know, waking up to the fact that you're a projection of all your parents' fears and wants and desires, and working through that family of origin stuff, that is a huge piece of this inner work. And the word that keeps coming up in my mind is connection. As a mystic, the mystical imperative is we are one. It really is about moving in accord to connecting to this great movement that is mysterious, and it's moving outside of us and inside of us. It's trying to get the real me in relationship to the real world, and breaking down those filters that are in between that mediate that, so that we don't get lost in the mediational pieces. Because I think, Bob, you're right, we're always projection. There's always going to be that mediational piece. But if we can clean it up so that we are getting it real, and I can live with the discomfort. I'll be honest, for the last 30 years, or 20 years, I guess, 20 some years, sadness has been a part of me now, and it's opened me. Talk about empathy. Wow, did that ever open me? And to realize I can be a sad person too. I don't have to be the happy-go-lucky all the time. That projection and breaking it down freed me, and yet it also caused me to experience some negative stuff in me and the world around me. However, I now know that what I'm experiencing is closer to the real. I want to laugh. I want to cry. I want to know the world without the lies. How do we get to that place? That's not an easy place to be. And once you get there, it's hard to be there and not be reacting all over the place, but allowing one to settle in to that point of mystery, of oneness, and with a certain amount of objectivity, which I think is huge and important in this. Again, consciousness is a house of mirrors, and man, oh man, we can chase our ass into smaller and smaller circles.
That's a perfect segue into a metaphor I wanted to throw out. And that is that as we project out into the world is a mirror reflecting back toward us. But because of our projection, it's a funhouse mirror. It's not an accurate depiction. And as we begin to look more at ourselves and become to realize what we're projecting and how often we're projecting, we can almost begin to smooth that funhouse mirror out a little bit. We get a little bit closer to a true reflection. And if we push that metaphor too far, it breaks down. But it's a way to more accurately depict what's going on in that interaction between our interior self and the world.
And we develop internal subjective equations that might not smooth the mirror out, but allow us to see what the curvature of the mirror is in such a way as to know, for us to know that that is not a real reflection. And that is pretty much my life. I've never gotten a clear reflection, but I've gotten lots of information that tells me that it's not a clear reflection, and that is very helpful in my own journey.
Well, and that is such an interesting metaphor, because if we're always looking at that mirror, then we are going to always be getting something back that is based on what our experience is, what we see. So how do we open up to something that is possible that is not being reflected back to us? And I think that is that's where that internal stuff comes in, the internal work. Because once we say, and I've met people who believe that their life is always going to be the way it is because it's always been that way, right? I mean, we all have. And they understand the way the world works, and they understand life, and they've learned how to adapt and to navigate it and succeed in it, right? But there's still that internal piece that could open them up to something that was different that they can't even imagine yet. So how do we get to that place of imagining something different? The idea that we live in a world that is always going to have war and conflict. That's a perception that we all share. And how do we get to a place where something else can be possible? And so I think that um,
I keep thinking,
looking out for. Huh?
I was going to say, we can no longer live in a world where war is possible.
Yeah, because we're going to blow ourselves up, right?
Yeah.
Well, it makes me think. It makes me think of the famous John Lennon Yoko Ono maxim: "War is over if you want it."
Right. Right. Yes.
And that was what they kept saying. It's up to you. You want war to be over? It's over.
But
If
now
want it.
we're back to projecting. And I think,
Right.
Marianne, this is kind of, we're still projecting conflict, our inner conflict. I mean, even with Ukraine and Russia, there's a part of me that is super hawky. And, I have to keep watching that. That says something about me. And I have to look at that because I think Russia needs to be stopped. I think it's pretty much where Hitler was in the 30s, when he went into Poland and Czechoslovakia.
Well, it's even more than that. If you look at the war crimes that they're conducting, I mean, civilization cannot allow those war crimes to go. I don't want to say unpunished, but at least they have to be recognized, and something has to be codified in our collective approach to international relations.
Yeah, and
that doesn't allow those kind of things to happen.
Well, and we get The Economist, which whoever writes that, boy, they think in itty bitty fonts because it's an amazing. But the one on China, China, all the rules, the global laws, China wasn't really part of that, and they don't like that, and they say, why should we obey laws that we weren't part of making? And so the rule of law is breaking down. The world order. Trump gave up America's hegemony, which was our dominance in the world, and that has to do with projection. This whole thing has to do with projection. So how do we, and Marianne, I think you nailed it, how do we bust our projections so that we can reproject, something other than our conflicts?
Yeah.
You tell me, sister.
Well, I'll tell you what, life has been extremely frustrating for me lately, so I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. But I think that's part of our global language that has to emerge, that projection needs to be a part of that language where we begin to sort those things out, where we can begin to, start getting closer to the real. And right now, we have 20 to 30% of the people in America who are projecting, they're pro-Putin, they're anti-American, and they don't know it. The way I say it is the far right is just as afraid of diversity as is Muslim extremism is afraid of modernity, and we're lost in projection, and that concerns me because America is going through a huge hysterical phenomenon in my mind, and it's filled with all these projections of white people losing their power, using fear to get your way. It's a great concern of mine, and we must somehow address this piece. And Bob, I love the way that you open this with, it's all a projection. And once we begin to see that, we can start, embracing what Marianne is saying. Well, how the hell do we get out of this? What constitutes real health in this? And the first thing is it's a soul-searching thing. And this is the piece that the planet, it's not about religion, it's about spiritual. It's about connecting, and that the real connects with the real. And that's what I get from you, Marianne. You don't have to be a pastor or a psychologist. All you have to do is be honest in your relationships. And, you dealing with children's cancer, you've had to deal with relationships at a very intimate level. and what parents do with their children and project on them and try to keep the hope alive. All of that is part of it, and in my mind, experience is the greatest teacher. So, how do we get out of this? So, we're about at the end of our time, and I have failed to watch that. So, final comments? Marianne, be brief, because I know you got a meeting.
Yeah, I think that we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, because it is a huge, huge topic. But I would just say, let's work on fostering our imagination, and by doing that, and looking for ways to catch our own projections, and at least, ask questions of ourselves. And when we feel a certain way, why do we feel that way? And even just something as simple as that can start to lead us to a new place, and a new way to be in the world.
Amen. Bob, final comments?
Well, I'm going to just recommend 2 tools that I've found useful over the years. As our listeners well know, I'm very much enamored by Carl Jung. I think that he had the broadest, most close to realistic view of the universe that exists. But he was very, very misunderstood. Some people idolized him, some people demonized him, and he knew that. So toward the end of his life, he put together, I won't call it his magnum opus, but it was his statement to the public. It's called Man and His Symbols. And it's a collection of his views and those of his major students. My favorite picture is on page 229, and it's a man, a woman, and a child walking into a town square. And you see them in silhouette on a gray background. That gray background is reality. In the silhouette is each of their projections. They each see the town square differently. The man sees the sporting goods store. The woman sees the fashion emporium. The child sees the toy store. They're all there. They're all seeing reality, but they're all seeing their own projection onto it. So I think that particular book I would recommend highly to our listeners. And another thing that I would recommend is a rock and roll fable by Harry Nielsen. It came out in the early 70s, called The Point. And the hero of The Point, a little boy named Oblio, and his dog Arrow, are on their search, their self-journey. And he encounters someone on the way called the Rock Man. And the Rock Man gives him a very simple truth. You see what you want to see, and you hear what you want to hear.
Yeah, that's it. And we're going to go somewhere that I hope is helpful for everybody next week. Self-compassion. We get lost in all this stuff. We beat ourselves up. We have regrets. It's just awful, isn't it? But there's a piece of practice that I hope is part of everybody's day, everybody's hour, and that it shows itself in nanoseconds. Self-compassion. I worked for a wilderness school, and one thing I learned is it's run by a Carmelite monk, ex-Carmelite monk. And one of the things they talked about was that children have rice paper souls. Walk softly. Do not use harsh tones if you can help it. It's about how we are gentle with ourselves. We are so sometimes, I won't say we, I'll say I am sometimes so wretched to myself. I tear myself up, I tear myself down, and then I look at myself and I go, wow, this vulnerability is an opening for me to experience a gentleness with myself. Self-compassion. This is Red Hawk. I'm at the deep end, and blessings in all directions.